The couple things I'm going to talk about today are, one, identifying who the bad guys are, right? So who they are, how they get in, and how you prevent them from getting in. So let's go through it. So who's the bad guy? It's not this guy with the, the stocking over his face. Most people typically think that the bad guy is this, this Russian teen that you can't see from across, overseas trying to get into your computer. More often than not, it's actually employees or ex-employees, disgruntled employees or ex-employees that are actually really the biggest problem, biggest fear that you should be considering. How do they get in? There's several different ways. So one, physical access to the equipment. Do you have a server room? Some people do. We deal in mostly small businesses, so some people have a server room, some people don't. Physical access to the actual equipment, whether it be a room or the actual equipment being locked up in a rack, that's important. Hardware, so we talk about things like firewall switches, and I'll talk about in depth the types of hardware that we recommend having, recommend locking down, and how to make sure that you keep yourself protected. Software, that's a big piece of all of this, and I'll break into the different pieces of hardware and software, and we recommend keeping patched and up to date so that you can stay safe. And then social engineering. I'm not sure actually a lot of people are totally aware of what social engineering is, but it's becoming more and more popular. Actually, it was 17% of all cyber crimes were social engineering, and that number is actually on the rise. And I have a real world example. I used to go through a case study that I had read about that's fantastic, but I actually had recently, about a month, 2 months ago, where something actually happened personally to me that I will take you guys through, which is actually pretty interesting. So cool. So let's get into it. So the physical equipment. So if you don't have a server room, or if you do have a server room, we prefer you keep things locked up. You need to make sure that people that need to get access to it, get access to it. Those that don't, do not. If you do have networking equipment, that is locked up, so people can't just walk up and plug things in. Make sure that it's not easily accessible. I've seen several times where we go out and there's a common area where people work and they've got their server and stuff on a table, and it's easy to just kind of waltz up and maybe plug in a network cable into a switch or plug a thumb drive into the server. And you want to make sure that you keep things like that locked down. Leaving your PC unattended or unlocked. That's another big one. People think, oh, I'm just going to go to the washroom for a second. Nobody's gonna do anything with my computer. I don't have anything that important that somebody would want. That's a huge risk to leave that unlocked even for just a couple moments. And I'll talk about a very easy way to combat that. Improper disposal of secure information. So this is a big one too. So we're talking receipts, client information, all the way down to, and you'd be surprised, copiers, multifunction devices. I'm sure most of you folks have those at your offices or at your sites. And those are typically recycled devices that you're leasing and bringing out. You'd be surprised what's on the actual hard drives in those devices. So making sure that your information, both on computers, servers, copiers, manufactured devices, are secure, white, and so that you're protected. The second piece is the hardware, and it's not that new Mac up there. One, a misconfigured firewall or router. That's really the gateway into your network. So everything that comes in will pass through that. And then secondly, an access point. That's typically your mobile devices, and as mobile becomes more and more popular, wireless is going to become even more prevalent. So making sure that you keep both your firewall, your router, and your access points locked down and secure. And again, I will break into some detailed levels on these in the upcoming slides. Older unsupported technologies, they tend to be open to exploits. People out there that are trying to get into your network, that are trying to get into your computer, are looking for unpatched software. So you look at Microsoft's releasing updates weekly, or at least every other week, and they're trying to keep up with the amount of exploits that people find that are available. So it's especially scary when somebody stops supporting hardware or software to get onto something that's going to be kept up to date. Otherwise, you're just going to be open and susceptible to attacks. Software. So this is a big one too. So out-of-date software, I talk about Windows updates. They patch weekly. You want to make sure that you're getting updates, and I'll talk about a really easy way to make sure that you're doing that, and it's not costly at all. And then unpatched third-party applications. I'm sure there's a lot of folks in here that probably use Timberline. I know that's we deal with a lot of folks that use Timberline, at least in the construction industry. But that's really any application that's critical to your business. You want to make sure that those things are staying up to date and patched so that you're not, again, susceptible to people exploiting your software. Viruses, malware, and spam. Chuck Gowdy actually did an interesting segment on ABC News on Tuesday. I don't know if anybody saw it. It was talking about ransomware, and they went through it, and it was quite interesting, and it's becoming more and more popular now. I can't tell you how many times we've seen it or come across a prospect of ours that's had it. But ransomware is becoming incredibly prevalent, where somebody gets into your network, they then reach out, it pulls down a payload and will encrypt your files, and you try to open it, and it tells you need to pay anywhere from $200 to $5,000 to decrypt and get to this information. So, what they talked about, and they had the FBI on there saying, obviously it's the same as any other terrorism, don't pay, don't give into it. However, the really only secure way and the only way to battle this is to have a good backup solution in place. Is anybody here, I don't know, everybody probably doesn't want to admit it, have they been infected by anything like Crypto Locker, Crypto Wall? Oh, wow. I had a much smaller room and we had somebody last time. So anyways, that's one of the most common ones you'll see now, an FBI warning screen. That's obviously a false FBI warning screen telling you that, hey, we have your data, and if you want it back, you need to pay us. Obviously do not do that. So that's one of the big things, and it's becoming more and more commonplace, not just in what we deal with, mostly small businesses, but bigger corporations. You saw Sony get hacked, you saw Target, and I just got a notice from Blue Cross Blue Shield that my social security number may have been compromised, which is fantastic. I'm sure Hunt is not susceptible to those things. They are good to go. So that's a big thing that's coming up these days, and I'll tell you how to protect yourself both from a software and hardware perspective. Non-complex passwords. I'm not going to steal the thunder from Matt, but he's got an interesting slide talking about common passwords from last year that people use, and I would venture to guess that some folks are probably using some of the passwords on that list because it's a lot easier to remember. So we'll talk about some of those coming up. And then web browsing. So you want to make sure that your web browser, whether you're using Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, depending on the operating system you have, you want to make sure that those browsers are getting fully updated. Or again, you're going to be susceptible to somebody exploiting an older version like Internet Explorer 9 on your computer. Social engineering. So what is it really? I mean, in the sense of computers, it's really the act of obtaining or attempting to obtain otherwise secure information by conning an individual. So I had a really good example that I used to go through this. It's a little bit longer, and I'd be happy to go through with anybody after today, but I had something happen to me a couple months ago. I got a call from my grandfather saying, hey, I just wanted to check in because I just got a call from somebody saying, hey, Granddad, it's Michael, I'm in Arizona, and I just got into a car accident. I killed a woman, and I'm waiting, I need to post bail. Can I have you call back, or I'll have my lawyer call you back in 10 minutes, and you can wire the bail money to him. And, my grandfather was actually, at one point, held at knife point, and he didn't give in, so he's definitely not giving in to this guy, but he basically said a couple key things that really rang true with me is one, the guy who called him Granddad. I don't know how he knows I call him Granddad, obviously. I mean, most people, grandpa, grandfather. He knew I called him Granddad, so he called him Granddad. He said he was Michael. Again, only my grandparents and my parents call me Michael. Everybody else calls me Mike. And then third, he said he was in Arizona. I was set to be in Arizona 3 days from then for a convention. So it's very interesting how they must have gotten my information. I can only think of a couple ways. One, they maybe found me on AVG's conference coming up guest list. Or two, maybe the flight, my Southwest Airlines flight, they found a list of me being on that. But they made it a very believable situation. And if they would have done it to probably anybody else in my family, they may have given in, but not my grandfather. So it's actually startling what people are trying to do to get you to give them your information. Because it's amazing what they can do once they get your account number, once they get your password, once they get, obviously, your social security number. So, and the other piece of that is really like phishing websites. So phishing websites are websites that are supposed to be, well, they're false websites that are made to look like they're legitimate, real websites. So hey, put in your login information, and instead of going to where you think it's going to somebody else. And now your information's compromised, they're into your account, they're taking essentially whatever they need. So, the most important part is how do you protect yourself? So, for one, lock up your equipment if you can. I know sometimes it's tough if you don't have a server room in particular or even a networking rack, But if you can, please, I advise you to lock those things up. We have key fob access at our office. We lock those things down pretty good. Our server room has key fob access that only technicians can get into. Again, it's at your own discretion. We just recommend keeping things locked down like that. And again, if you don't have that, you just have maybe a network rack. Most network racks, I know we deal mostly in Dell, but they have locks on them. You can lock them, unlock them when you need to get in. That way, you don't have people walking up and connecting to things. 2, lock your PCs when you walk away. This is very easy, and most people tell me like, oh, I didn't know I could hit the Windows key and L and it'll just lock my screen. So I get up to walk away from my computer, I just hit that real quick, I walk away and I take care of what I need to, and I don't have to worry about anybody walking up, whether there's information on my computer I think people really care about or not. I just want to make sure that I'm protected and people aren't walking up, especially if you're dealing with QuickBooks, accounting information, things like that. You want to make sure that you're not leaving your PC unlocked, even if it's for just a couple minutes. Shred all your secure information. I can't advise. The other example, like I said, for the social engineering, he was able to get a lot of his information from dumpster diving. You'd be amazed at some of these guys that will do this, looking at receipts, looking at account information. They will pull that. So make sure that when you're doing those things, shred them. And even more importantly, the things you don't realize, like technology. Oh, I got this PC I don't need anymore. I'm just gonna drop it off and recycle it. Ask if they're going to destroy the hard drive when you drop it off there, because obviously there's a lot of important information, I'm sure, on those hard drives, so you want to make sure that they securely destroy those. And then, as I spoke about with the copiers, I had a copier at my previous position that we had that had all this doctor's information on it. It was apparently at a doctor's office before us, and all patient and doctor information was on this device that they just did not wipe. So make sure that it's not that you physically have to do it, obviously. Making sure that you ask the right questions and tell people the right things. Can you make sure that can I get a certificate that this was destroyed? Is a good question to ask somebody. Purchase or reconfigure an existing firewall. So a firewall, as I said, is kind of the gateway into your network, and inherently by its nature, it's supposed to block everything unless what you allow in. So we configure those to really be locked down to allow mail-in. And if you have certain applications or you have a website internally, there's only certain things that we will allow to get through that firewall, and then everything else is blocked. I know a lot of folks that use maybe just the Comcast modem or router, or AT&T Uverse router as their firewall. It has some firewall functionality to it, but it's not a true dedicated hardware firewall. So we recommend getting one if you can. Usually they'll run anywhere between $500 and $1,500. So getting a firewall, and if you have one already, just reconfigure it to make sure that it's up to standards and it's blocking out what it should. I can't tell you how many times we've seen remote desktop wide open to the outside for somebody to try to get in. There's a lot of open ports that we prefer to close up if they're not necessary. There's a lot of secure ways to get into a network, and so we recommend locking it down as much as possible. If you're using access points, which I'm sure most folks are, try to use WPA2 security. It's a radio button check on the back end of the web console to change the configuration. It's very easy. Most new access points will have WPA2. If you have an older access point, it at least has WPA. That's more secure than web. Anybody here have Uverse at home? Wireless? Yeah. It is a really long, you got probably a post-it note, the numbers for the password, so when somebody comes over you can give that to them to log in or go read it on the side of the modem. It's something you'll never remember. And oddly enough, it's the easiest to crack. So WPA2 is a passphrase that you can choose. Usually, obviously, you want to do, if you can, uppercase, lowercase, with a weird character or number at the end. That's ideal, and that's a lot easier for you to remember and give to somebody if they need to log on, but it's a lot harder to crack if you're trying to brute force it from the outside. It's very, very easy to get those like Uverse web keys. And I say Uverse because I just know Uverse uses a lot of the web encryption. Ensure all firmware is up to date on the networking equipment. So there's software, it's essentially software for hardware is what the firmware is. So we used to use a lot of the ironically enough, CISCO, ASA, obviously a different CISCO, ASA firewalls, and they had firmware updates that would come out pretty regularly. We would update those. Now, the firewall we used to use a couple years back, they've end of lifed it. So that means they're not releasing any more firmware, which is kind of like open season to somebody that's trying to get in. They're like, great, okay, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to release anything until they stop supporting it, because all they're going to do is, patch what I'm trying to get into. So that's making sure that if you have a firewall, make sure that it does have current firmware and software on it, And if it's not supported anymore, which we do a pretty good job of letting folks know when their hardware is end of life, you want to look into something new. And they're usually good for several years. Keep all your servers and workstations patched with Windows updates. So what you see there is WSUS. Essentially, it's centrally managed Windows updates. It's a built-in feature function of the Windows Server operating system, so it's not like you have to go out and buy WSUS off the shelf. It comes with the server operating system. What it does is it allows you to push updates out to all the workstations and servers on your network that you choose at the time you choose, and then you can look in that one console to ensure that everybody's getting their updates. You can choose to not get certain updates if you have third-party applications, let's say, that aren't compatible with Internet Explorer 11. We can have everything after Internet Explorer 10 not even download in the first place. So making sure that you're using something like WSUS or just having Windows updates happening regularly, both on the servers and the workstations, is a critical component to keeping yourself patched. A managed up-to-date antivirus is also big, and a web filtering solution. So the way we typically explain this to our prospects and clients is that your web filtering is kind of like having a bouncer outside the bar. He's the guy checking IDs, making sure that people can't get in that should be in. And then your antivirus is kind of like if the guy gets rowdy on the inside and you got to kick him out, your antivirus is the guy that gets him out. So it's a two-pronged approach. Web filtering is fantastic. It's typically done on the firewall side. It'll protect your network from the outside for the most part. But for instance, if you come into your network with a flash drive from home that maybe you had an infection on that you didn't even realize, and you plug it into your computer, guess what? You're already inside your network, and the firewall is not going to do a fantastic job of catching most of that. So having an antivirus and the web filter, and I say managed, that's the key to a lot of all this. Managed antivirus is very important because, like the Windows updates, you can in one console see who's infected, who's not doing their scans, who's not getting the latest definitions, all from one place instead of having to walk around every person and see who's not getting those updates. So we want to make sure that you have a managed antivirus and web filtering in place if you can. The firewalls that we use Sonic Walls, and they come with a web filtering piece that you can get, an annual subscription that will do that out of the box. Now the crypto wall, the crypto locker that I talked about on the malware side, most of those come in through a payload that will download somehow. You get it on your computer, and then it will reach out to some server somewhere else, typically in a different country, to pull down the actual payload and start encrypting your files. The cool thing about what SonicWall does with the web filtering is you can block a botnet filter of what points out to which country. So unless you're doing a lot of international business, you can lock down to say, I don't want this to reach out to Russia, to China, to different places. And that way, when it tries to download that payload from a server outside the country, it can't do it. It blocks it. So just two key components that are very important to a network to keeping it secure. Implementing a company password policy. This is also something we see very frequently when we come into new prospects. And even existing clients sometimes don't want to do it right away. But we recommend having a complex password. So a combination, obviously, of letters, numbers, and an odd character if you can. Excuse me. So refrain from using things like your first name and last name, the street you grew up on, your pet's name, and then a myriad of the top, Matt's got a great slide of the top 20 passwords used in 2014, and try not to use any of those as well. But having a policy, that you can put these policies in place on the back end of the server so that people have to set a password, that sort of strength to it. Otherwise, they can't change their password. So it's important to put those things in place so that you don't have very, very easy, because all somebody needs is access into one person's user, right? And then they have access to the rest of your network typically. So making sure you have a complex password is incredibly important. Implementing a hosted mail spam filtering solution. So when people are doing their mail on site, they have what's called maybe an Exchange server on premise. We will use hosted spam filtering. What that does is it will scrub the mail before it even hits your network. So it's looking for malware, it's looking for things that you shouldn't get infected by prior to it even hitting your network, which is fantastic. So we use that solution when folks have on-premise mail, and then when they have their mail, I know there's probably some people, I've spoken to some folks already that are doing like Office 365 through Microsoft. They've already got a great spam solution built into that as well. So long as you have something in place, that's typically what we recommend doing. Educate users on common threats. Like, education is the second biggest thing I think you can do to make sure that people aren't going to places they shouldn't go or clicking on a link that maybe they think is legitimate and is not. We put out quarterly newsletters to at least our clients to say, hey, here's what we're seeing, both from a new technology perspective and also a threat perspective. If something gets hot, crypto wall, crypto locker, we'll send it out at that moment saying, hey, everybody, just FYI, here's what the common threat is, here's what you're looking for. Don't open that attachment with a .exe on it. That is not a good thing. So we set out and educate users as much as possible to make sure that they're not getting into these things. We'll keep you very secure. Implementing an off-site, ideally image-based backup solution. When I talked about crypto wall, crypto locker, really the only defense, foolproof defense to that is having a good working backup solution in place. Because if they encrypt your files and you don't want to pay them the ransom, you have little to no chance of getting your data unless you pull it from a backup. So make sure that if you have backups in place, at least do your critical files off-site and make sure that it's completing regularly. We have a monitoring system that we use that will integrate those into our reports, and we tell you, what's completing, what's not completing, and remediate that for you. But for yourselves, you can set up, email notifications to say when backups are missed, backups failed. It may seem small until it actually happens to you. You just want to make sure that those backups are in place, they are happening, and you can go back far enough. Typically, when you get an infection like a crypto locker, you're going to know, or the user's going to know pretty quick that they have it. Their files will start getting encrypted, they won't be able to open them. So just reacting as quick as you can so that you don't have to restore back too far is ideal, right? I mean, it's one thing to lose a day of business, it's another to lose all of your business or perhaps a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So make sure you have an offsite backup. Image-based is really, all that is a snapshot of everything that's on your server, not just your critical files. That's ideal, so that if something were to happen, we could actually just spin up the server image on a different piece of hardware almost immediately to get you back up and running while we scrub the files. Don't be afraid to verify the identity of somebody, whoever's calling you and pretending to be who they say they are. Most often, yeah, they're probably who they say they are, but ask the right questions. Have them verify. People aren't going to ask you for, your password to the login account. I've never come across an organization that's on the phone and said, oh, what's your current password? Well, no, you don't give that stuff to them. So just be wary and be smart about who you're talking to and what you're telling them when it comes to insurance agencies, banks, and different websites that you're a part of. And then again, never give your password to somebody over the phone. Nobody will ever ask for that. So at this point, I'd love to wrap up. I want to bring up one of my senior engineers. He's also our sales engineer here at 3 Points, Frank Anderson. And I'd love to field any questions that anybody has here for a couple of minutes. And then if we run a little bit past that, I'm planning on staying here late, and we can answer any other questions that folks have so that we can keep the program going. So